In January 1944, the Allied advance up the Italian peninsula had ground to a virtual halt at what became known as the Gustav Line, a series of heavily fortified German defensive positions anchored by the imposing Monte Cassino and stretching across Italy from coast to coast. As American, British and other Allied forces attempted to break through this formidable barrier, they faced a particularly deadly challenge: the precision of German artillery fire. The small town of San Pietro, nestled in the mountains 80 miles southeast of Rome, had been reduced to rubble after weeks of intense fighting. Barely recognizable as a town anymore, it served as a forward communications post for the U.S. 36th Infantry Division. From this vantage point, American forces had a clear view of the devastation being wrought by German 80mm artillery, widely considered the most effective and feared artillery weapon of the war. What made the German artillery particularly lethal was not just the power of the 88s themselves, but the sophisticated fire control system that directed them. German forward observers, concealed in the mountainous terrain, would radio precise coordinates to artillery batteries positioned safely behind the lines. The result was devastatingly accurate fire that seemed to find Allied positions with uncanny precision, often within minutes of troops establishing new locations. Lieutenant Eleanor Fairchild, a 29-year-old signals officer from Baltimore, had arrived in Italy just 3 weeks earlier. With a background in electrical engineering from Johns Hopkins University, one of the few women in her graduating class, Fairchild had volunteered for the Women's Army Corps, WAC, immediately after Pearl Harbor. Her technical expertise quickly drew attention, and instead of being assigned to typical WAC duties, she found herself recruited into the Signal Corps and trained in advanced radio communications and electronic countermeasures. A surviving photograph shows Fairchild in her Army uniform, a slender woman with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a determined expression. Former colleagues described her as methodical, intensely curious, and possessing an intuitive understanding of radio technology that bordered on the uncanny. Eleanor could hear things in the static that the rest of us couldn't, recalled Technical Sergeant James Roberts, who served with her in Italy. She didn't just understand radio theoretically, she seemed to have a sixth sense about it. On the morning of January 15th, Fairchild was monitoring German radio traffic from a makeshift signals intelligence post in the remains of what had once been San Pietro's town hall. Her assignment was routine: intercept any German communications possible, record them, and forward them to headquarters for translation and analysis. But as she listened through her headphones, adjusting frequencies on her modified SCR 300 radio set, she began to notice something unusual. "There's a pattern here," she noted to Corporal Michael Donahue, who was operating a second set nearby. "Every German artillery barrage is preceded by a specific type of transmission. It's brief, just a few seconds, but it's always on this frequency range, and it always follows the same format." Over the next several hours, Fairchild methodically documented these transmissions, correlating them with the artillery barrages that inevitably followed minutes later. By the end of her shift, she had compiled convincing evidence that these short transmissions were fire coordination signals between German forward observers and their artillery batteries. That evening, Fairchild requested a meeting with Major Robert Wilson, the division's signals officer. Bringing her carefully documented notes, she explained her observation. "Sir, I believe I've identified the radio signature of German artillery fire control. They're using a narrowband frequency in the 41-42 MHz range with a distinctive transmission pattern. Most importantly, their transmissions follow a predictable sequence that gives us a 3 to 4 minute warning before shells start falling." Major Wilson, initially skeptical, became increasingly interested as Fairchild presented her evidence. "If you're right, Lieutenant, this could be valuable intelligence. We could potentially warn units when a barrage is coming." "We could do more than just warn, sir," Fairchild replied, a thoughtful expression on her face. I think we could actually disrupt their fire control entirely. Fairchild explained that the German transmissions appeared to use a simple but effective encoding system to communicate targeting coordinates. Based on her analysis, these transmissions needed to maintain signal clarity to be effective. If we could jam these specific frequencies at the right moment, she suggested, we might be able to prevent the artillery batteries from receiving accurate coordinates. The challenge, as she outlined it, was significant. Standard Allied jamming techniques typically flooded entire frequency bands with noise, which was effective but required substantial power and often disrupted Allied communications as well. What Fairchild was proposing was far more surgical, specifically targeting the narrow frequency range used for artillery coordination with precisely timed interference. It would have to be mobile, low power, and extremely precisely tuned, she explained. We'd need to develop a system that could detect their initial transmission, the one from the forward observer identifying a target, and immediately jam the frequency before the full targeting data could be transmitted. Major Wilson considered the proposal. Electronic warfare was still in its relative infancy in 1944, and what Fairchild was suggesting went beyond standard operating procedures. After a few moments of thought, he gave her a cautious approval. You have 48 hours to develop a proof of concept, Lieutenant. If you can demonstrate that this is viable, I'll take it up the chain of command. For the next 2 days, Fairchild barely slept. Working in a small, shell-damaged room that had been converted into a signals workshop, she modified a standard SCR-300 radio set, altering its circuitry to serve as both a detection and jamming system. The technical challenges were substantial. The device needed to automatically recognize the specific signature of German artillery coordination transmissions and immediately switch from passive monitoring to active jamming. Using salvage components from damaged radio equipment and drawing on her pre-war experience in electrical engineering, Fairchild created what she called a signal analysis and selective jamming system, though the soldiers who later operated it would simply call it Fairchild's Jammer. On January 18th, she demonstrated the prototype to Major Wilson and Captain Thomas Hayes from Division Intelligence. The device, connected to her radio set, successfully identified a recorded German artillery coordination transmission and automatically activated its jamming function within 1.5 seconds, theoretically fast enough to block the crucial targeting data from reaching the German artillery batteries. It's ingenious, Captain Hayes acknowledged, examining the modified radio. But there's a world of difference between jamming a recording in this room and actually disrupting German fire control on the battlefield. I know, sir, Fairchild replied. That's why I'd like to test it in actual field conditions. After brief consideration, Major Wilson gave his authorization. You can test it tomorrow at the forward observation post on Hill 445. But I want to be clear, Lieutenant. This is a proof of concept only. You are not authorized to engage in any action that might reveal our awareness of German communications protocols without explicit authorization. The following morning, Fairchild and Technical Sergeant Roberts transported the prototype jammer to the observation post, a sandbagged position on a ridge overlooking a valley where elements of the 36th Division were attempting to advance against entrenched German positions. From this vantage point, they could observe both Allied movements and the impact of German artillery. For several hours, they monitored radio traffic while watching the deadly dance below. German shells fell with alarming accuracy whenever American troops attempted to move forward, forcing them back into whatever cover they could find. Each barrage was preceded, just as Fairchild had documented, by the distinctive radio transmission that her device was designed to detect. The next time we intercept one of their targeting transmissions, I'm going to jam it, Fairchild told Roberts, her expression resolute. I know the Major said proof of concept only, but those are our men dying down there. Roberts hesitated. That's directly against orders, Lieutenant. I know, she replied, adjusting the settings on her device. I'll take full responsibility. UA. At 14:22 hours, the jammer detected an incoming German transmission, the distinctive signal pattern that preceded artillery fire. Automatically, it switched to jamming mode, broadcasting a precisely tuned interference signal designed to corrupt the targeting data. Fairchild and Roberts watched tensely, expecting to see the usual German artillery barrage hitting the American positions in the valley. Instead, nothing. The landscape remained quiet. The minutes stretched on, and still no shells fell. "It worked," Roberts whispered, almost afraid to believe it. "They didn't fire. Or if they did," Fairchild added, "they didn't have accurate targeting data." Over the next hour, they intercepted and jammed 3 more artillery coordination transmissions. In each case, either no barrage followed or shells fell widely scattered and far from Allied positions, a dramatic contrast to the precision that had characterized German artillery fire in previous days. As dusk approached, they received urgent orders to return to headquarters. Word of their unauthorized jamming test had reached Major Wilson, who was waiting for them with a stern expression that quickly gave way to reluctant admiration as he reviewed their results. "You disobeyed a direct order, Lieutenant," he said formally, before adding, "and potentially saved dozens of lives today." The 2nd Battalion was able to advance nearly half a mile with minimal casualties, their first significant progress in 10 days. The impromptu field test had demonstrated the effectiveness of Fairchild's approach more convincingly than any controlled demonstration could have. The immediate question became how to expand this initial success into a capability that could be deployed more broadly across the front. No one yet realized that Fairchild's improvised jamming system would not only change the immediate tactical situation, but would eventually lead to a strategic shift in electronic warfare methodology that would influence military operations for decades to come. The success of Fairchild's initial jamming test created both excitement and challenges within the Allied command structure. Electronic warfare was considered highly classified, with techniques and capabilities among the most closely guarded secrets of the war. Fairchild's improvised system, developed at the division level without higher authorization, represented both a significant opportunity and a potential security concern. Colonel Richard Harrison, the Fifth Army's chief signals officer, arrived at the 36th Division headquarters on January 20, 1944, specifically to assess Fairchild's innovation. His initial skepticism was evident as Fairchild explained her methodology and demonstrated the modified equipment. "You've essentially created a selective jamming system using standard equipment with field modifications," Harrison summarized, studying the device with growing interest. "What makes this different from our existing jamming capabilities?" "Precision and efficiency, sir," Fairchild explained. "Standard jammers flood entire frequency bands, requiring significant power and often disrupting our own communications. This system identifies specific transmission patterns, the German artillery coordination signature, and selectively jams only those signals, using minimal power and leaving other frequencies clear." Harrison's technical background allowed him to grasp the significance of this approach. Traditional electronic warfare in 1944 was relatively blunt. Powerful jammers would disrupt all radio communications in their range, friend and foe alike. This necessitated careful coordination and often meant jamming could only be employed in specific circumstances where Allied forces didn't need radio communications themselves. Fairchild's selective jamming approach potentially changed this calculation entirely. By targeting only specific types of enemy transmissions while leaving other frequencies open, it offered the possibility of continuous electronic warfare operations alongside normal communications, a capability that had significant strategic implications. After examining Fairchild's technical documentation and the results of the field test, Harrison made a decision that would prove pivotal. "Lieutenant Fairchild, I'm establishing a special technical unit effective immediately. You'll be detached from the 36th Division and report directly to 5th Army Signals. Your assignment is to develop this capability for deployment across the Italian front. This new unit, officially designated Special Technical Detachment 16, but informally known as Fairchild's Unit, was allocated space in a partially damaged villa 5 miles behind the front lines. Fairchild was given authorization to select personnel from across the 5th Army, prioritizing those with relevant technical backgrounds, and was assigned priority for certain signal equipment and components. The core technical challenge now became how to scale up from a single prototype to a deployable system that could protect a significant portion of the front lines. This required both technical refinements and a deeper understanding of German communications practices. Over the next 2 weeks, Fairchild led an intensive technical development process. Her team grew to include 7 technicians, including 2 fellow WACs with pre-war engineering experience and 5 male Signal Corps personnel with various technical backgrounds. Working in what had once been the villa's grand dining room, now filled with workbenches and test equipment, they developed what Fairchild called Version 2 of the jamming system. The refined design incorporated several significant improvements. Most importantly, it could monitor multiple frequency ranges simultaneously, automatically detecting and jamming German artillery coordination transmissions across a wider spectrum. Additionally, the team developed a mobile configuration that could be installed in modified jeeps, allowing the jammers to be quickly repositioned as needed to cover different sectors of the front. Technical Sergeant David Cohen, who had been a radio engineer before the war, proved particularly valuable in refining the system's detection capabilities. "The key is the signature recognition," he explained during one technical briefing. "We're not just looking for transmissions in a certain frequency range. We're identifying specific patterns in how the Germans structure their artillery communications. It's like recognizing a particular accent rather than just hearing that someone is speaking." This refined pattern recognition capability was crucial because it allowed the system to distinguish between routine German communications and the specific transmissions used for artillery coordination. This selectivity meant that Allied intelligence could continue to monitor and decode other German radio traffic, while only jamming the signals that directed artillery fire. As the technical development progressed, Fairchild also worked closely with intelligence officers to deepen their understanding of German artillery practices. Captured documents and prisoner interrogations provided valuable insights into the German fire control procedures, helping the team refine their jamming techniques to target vulnerabilities in the enemy's system. One crucial discovery came from a captured German artillery officer, Hauptmann Werner Müller. During interrogation, Müller revealed that German artillery units were trained to follow strict communication protocols. If targeting coordinates were not received clearly, standing orders required them to either request a retransmission or, if communications appeared to be compromised, to fall back on pre-planned firing patterns rather than risk hitting their own troops with inaccurate fire. This information was invaluable to Fairchild's team. It confirmed that jamming the initial targeting transmission would likely cause significant disruption rather than just prompting immediate retransmission attempts. More importantly, it suggested that consistent jamming would eventually force the Germans to rely on less effective pre-planned barrages rather than the responsive fire that had been so devastatingly effective. By early February 1944, Fairchild's team had produced 6 operational jamming units. After rigorous testing, Colonel Harrison authorized their deployment along a 10-mile section of the front where the 36th and 34th Divisions were preparing for operations against German positions. The deployment was conducted under strict security protocols. The jamming vehicles, modified jeeps with equipment concealed under canvas covers, were positioned at key points approximately 1 to 2 miles behind the front lines, close enough to detect and jam German transmissions, but far enough back to have some protection from direct fire. Each unit was operated by a two-person team working in shifts to maintain 24-hour coverage. Fairchild herself supervised the operation from a command post centrally located behind the deployment area. From here, she could monitor the performance of each jamming unit, analyze any changes in German communication patterns, and coordinate with division intelligence officers to assess the impact on enemy artillery effectiveness. The effect was immediate and dramatic. German artillery fire, which had been precisely targeted and responsive to battlefield developments, suddenly became erratic. Shells fell in empty areas or followed predictable patterns that troops could anticipate and avoid. In some sectors, German batteries fell completely silent for hours at a time, apparently unable to receive reliable targeting data. An artillery officer from the 34th Division reported, "We've been trying to move up that ridge for a week and getting hammered every time we show ourselves. Today we advanced 600 yards and barely received any fire at all. Whatever you signal people are doing, keep it up." The Germans, however, were quick to recognize that something had changed. Within days, monitoring stations detected German radio operators discussing communication difficulties and implementing fallback procedures. By mid-February, German signals units began experimenting with different frequencies and transmission patterns in an apparent attempt to overcome the jamming. This led to what Fairchild called the electronic chess game, a constant cycle of adaptation and counter-adaptation as each side tried to outmaneuver the other in the radio spectrum. When German operators shifted frequencies, Fairchild's team would identify the new patterns and update their jamming parameters. When the Germans attempted to use shorter, burst-style transmissions, the American system would be recalibrated to detect and jam these briefer signals. The technical challenge was substantial, requiring Fairchild's team to continuously modify their equipment as German practices evolved. But they maintained a crucial advantage. The selective nature of their jamming approach meant they could monitor German communications continuously, immediately detecting any changes in procedure and adapting accordingly. By late February, the effectiveness of the jamming operation had drawn attention at the highest levels of Allied command in Italy. General Mark Clark, commander of the Fifth Army, visited the Signals Villa to personally review the program. After a detailed briefing from Fairchild and a demonstration of the equipment, Clark authorized the expansion of the program across the entire Fifth Army front. "This is exactly the kind of innovative approach we need," he told his staff afterward. "The Germans have had the advantage in artillery coordination for too long. Lieutenant Fairchild's work has given us a way to neutralize one of their most significant tactical advantages." With this high-level support came increased resources. Additional personnel were assigned to the program, and production of jamming units was accelerated. By early March, 20 jamming teams were operational, covering approximately 60% of the Fifth Army's front-line positions. The impact on operations was significant. Allied casualties from artillery fire decreased by an estimated 30 to 40% in sectors covered by the jamming units. Infantry and armor units reported being able to maneuver with greater freedom, no longer constrained by the threat of immediate and accurate German artillery response. A report from the 1st Armored Division noted, "German artillery, previously able to target our tank movements within minutes, now appears to be firing blind. We've been able to reposition our units multiple times without drawing effective counterfire, allowing us to secure objectives that were previously inaccessible." As the program expanded, Fairchild focused on training and documentation. She developed a comprehensive manual for the operation and maintenance of the jamming equipment, along with tactical guidelines for optimal deployment. She personally conducted training sessions for new operators, emphasizing both the technical aspects of the system and the importance of understanding German communication patterns. "This isn't just about the equipment," she regularly told trainees. It's about understanding how the enemy communicates and where their vulnerabilities lie. The technology is just a tool. Your understanding of how to apply it is what makes it effective. By April 1944, as Allied forces prepared for a major offensive against the Gustav Line, Fairchild's signal jamming operation had evolved from an improvised field experiment to a systematic program that significantly influenced tactical planning. For the first time since the Italian campaign began, Allied commanders could plan operations with the expectation that German artillery would be substantially less effective than it had been previously. What no one yet realized was that this electronic battle would soon escalate dramatically as German signal units prepared to implement countermeasures that would force Fairchild and her team to develop even more sophisticated approaches to this invisible but crucial aspect of modern warfare. Now, Chapter 3, the counter-response. By mid-April 1944, the success of Fairchild's jamming operation had become impossible for German forces to ignore. The systematic disruption of their artillery coordination had significantly impacted their defensive capabilities along the Gustav Line, and German command recognized the need for a coordinated response. Intercepted communications and intelligence from prisoners revealed that Generalleutnant Fritz Wenzel, Chief of Staff of the German 10th Army, had established a specialized signals task force to address what they termed the American interference problem. This unit, drawing expertise from the Wehrmacht's communications research divisions, was tasked with developing countermeasures to restore the effectiveness of their artillery fire control system. The first German adaptation appeared on April 22nd, when monitoring stations detected new transmission patterns on frequencies slightly offset from those previously used. Rather than the simple coordinate transmissions that Fairchild's system had been jamming, these new signals used a more complex encoding pattern with what appeared to be redundant information spread across the transmission. Fairchild, analyzing these new signals at her command center, quickly recognized the German strategy. "They're using a form of redundant encoding," she explained to Colonel Harrison during an emergency briefing. "They're transmitting each set of coordinates multiple times within the same message using slightly different frequencies. Even if we jam part of the transmission, they can still recover enough information to target effectively." This German counter-adaptation presented a serious challenge. The selective jamming approach that had been so effective now faced a more resilient enemy system specifically designed to withstand it. Within days, German artillery fire began to regain some of its previous accuracy, though still not matching its pre-jamming effectiveness. Fairchild and her team worked around the clock to develop a response. The technical challenge was substantial. Their existing systems were designed to detect and jam specific transmission patterns, but the new German approach used variable patterns specifically intended to evade this type of jamming. After 3 days of intensive work, Fairchild presented a two-part solution. First, the team modified their detection algorithms to recognize the broader characteristics of the new German transmission style rather than looking for specific patterns. Second, they reconfigured their jamming approach to create what Fairchild called frequency flooding, a targeted but more comprehensive jamming effort that covered the entire range of frequencies the Germans were now using for redundant transmissions. "It's less elegant than our previous approach," Fairchild acknowledged, "but it addresses the specific countermeasure they've implemented. We'll use more power and jam a wider frequency range, but still nothing like the broad-spectrum jamming of traditional systems." The modified jammers were deployed on April 27th, and monitoring indicated immediate results. German artillery fire once again became less accurate, with many barrages falling well away from Allied positions. However, the wider jamming approach did create some issues for Allied communications, requiring careful coordination to ensure that friendly radio traffic used frequencies well separated from those being jammed. This cycle of adaptation and counter-adaptation continued through May 1944, with each side implementing increasingly sophisticated approaches. The Germans began using frequency hopping techniques, changing transmission frequencies according to pre-arranged schedules to avoid predictable patterns. Fairchild's team responded by developing broader monitoring capabilities and more agile jamming systems that could quickly detect and respond to frequency changes. The technical demands of this evolving electronic battle stretched the capabilities of field-modified equipment. Recognizing this limitation, Colonel Harrison arranged for Fairchild to work directly with Signal Corps engineers at a development facility near Naples. Here, with access to more sophisticated testing equipment and manufacturing capabilities, she was able to design what became known as the Mark III jamming system, a purpose-built unit specifically designed for the electronic environment of the Italian campaign. The Mark III incorporated several significant advances. Most importantly, it featured a semi-automated frequency analysis system that could continuously scan a wide range of frequencies, automatically identifying potential artillery coordination transmissions based on multiple characteristics. This substantially reduced the operator workload and increased the speed of response to new German transmission patterns. Additionally, the Mark III included a directional antenna system that could help locate the source of German transmissions, providing valuable intelligence on the position of forward observers and potentially allowing for more conventional countermeasures such as artillery or airstrikes on these positions. By early June 1944, as Allied forces prepared for a major offensive aimed at capturing Rome, the electronic battle had reached a high level of sophistication on both sides. German signals units were employing complex encryption and transmission security measures, while Fairchild's jamming teams were using equally advanced detection and disruption techniques. A significant breakthrough came on June 2nd, when Fairchild's analysis team identified a pattern in the German frequency hopping approach. Despite the apparent randomness of their frequency changes, the German system followed certain mathematical relationships that, once understood, made their future frequency selections somewhat predictable. They're using a systematic approach to what they think appears random, Fairchild explained in her report to Fifth Army Signals. There are underlying patterns in their frequency selection that we can exploit to predict their next moves in this electronic chess game. Maury, this insight allowed for a more proactive jamming strategy. Rather than simply reacting to German transmissions, jamming units could anticipate which frequencies would likely be used next and prepare accordingly. The effect was immediate. German artillery coordination was disrupted even more effectively than before, with many batteries appearing to abandon attempts at responsive fire entirely, falling back on pre-planned barrage patterns that were far less effective against mobile Allied forces. As the Allied offensive gained momentum in early June, the impact of this electronic advantage became increasingly evident. German defensive positions, designed to be supported by precisely directed artillery fire, became significantly more vulnerable when that fire support became unreliable. Allied units reported being able to advance with greater speed and lower casualties, with German artillery often firing at positions they had already abandoned or failing to target their actual locations effectively. The electronic warfare operation reached its peak during the capture of Rome on June 4, 1944. As Allied forces approached the city, German artillery, which might have significantly impeded the advance, was largely neutralized by the jamming operation. Post-action reports indicated that approximately 70% of German artillery communications had been successfully disrupted during the critical phases of the operation. General Clark personally commended Fairchild and her team in a ceremony held in Rome on June 6, noting that their invisible battlefield contributions had saved countless Allied lives and significantly accelerated the capture of the Italian capital. Fairchild was awarded the Legion of Merit, a rare honor for a WAC officer, in recognition of her innovative contributions. The success of the jamming operation in the advance to Rome created new challenges as the campaign moved into northern Italy. The more mobile nature of operations meant that jamming units needed to be even more portable and quick to deploy. Additionally, as German forces fell back to new defensive lines, they had opportunities to implement more substantial changes to their communication systems. By July 1944, German signals units had begun implementing their most sophisticated countermeasure yet, a true frequency hopping system that changed frequencies during transmission, making it much more difficult to jam effectively. This system, based on technology similar to that being developed for guided weapons, represented a significant technical leap beyond previous German approaches. Faced with this new challenge, Fairchild once again demonstrated the innovative thinking that had characterized her approach from the beginning. Rather than trying to match the German technical advancement directly, which would have required equipment beyond what was available in the field, she developed what she called a predictive disruption strategy. This approach focused on identifying the limited number of frequencies used by the German system and creating periodic rolling jamming across this entire range. While not as precisely targeted as previous techniques, this approach effectively created dead zones in the frequency spectrum that German transmissions would inevitably encounter as they hopped between frequencies. Think of it as creating traffic barriers on different parts of a road network, she explained to her team. We don't need to block every road simultaneously. We just need to ensure that any journey will encounter at least one roadblock. This strategy proved remarkably effective, despite its relative simplicity. German artillery communications were still disrupted approximately 60% of the time, not as consistently as earlier in the campaign, but still providing a significant tactical advantage to Allied forces. By September 1944, Fairchild's electronic warfare operation had become an integral part of Allied operations in Italy. What had begun as an improvised solution, developed by a single innovative officer, had evolved into a systematic program involving dozens of specialized jamming units and over 100 personnel dedicated to maintaining Allied advantage in the electronic spectrum. More significantly, the principles Fairchild had developed, selective jamming, pattern recognition, and adaptive response, were being incorporated into broader signal corps doctrine. The lessons learned in Italy were being applied to planning for operations in France and eventually for the anticipated invasion of Japan. As the Italian campaign continued into the fall of 1944, the electronic battle remained a crucial but largely invisible aspect of the conflict. Behind the more visible struggles for terrain and position, Fairchild and her German counterparts continued their technical duel across the radio spectrum, a battle of wits and innovation that significantly influenced the course of the campaign. As Allied forces continued their slow advance up the Italian peninsula through the winter of 1944-45, the electronic warfare techniques pioneered by Eleanor Fairchild became increasingly integrated into standard operational planning. What had begun as an improvised response to a specific tactical problem had evolved into a systematic approach that influenced both immediate operations and future military doctrine. In October 1944, Fairchild was promoted to captain and transferred to the newly established electronic warfare section at Allied Force Headquarters in Caserta. This assignment recognized both her technical contributions and her emerging role as a strategist in what was becoming a new dimension of warfare. In this position, she was tasked with documenting the lessons learned from the jamming operations and developing training programs to expand electronic warfare capabilities across the Mediterranean theater. The technical manual she authored, Selective Signal Interference, Principles and Field Applications, became the foundation for Allied electronic warfare doctrine in the European theater. Notably, copies were requested by signals units preparing for operations in France, and several of the officers trained in Fairchild's techniques participated in the Normandy campaign and subsequent operations in northwest Europe. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Stevens, who served as the signal intelligence officer for the 7th Army in southern France, later wrote, "The Fairchild methodology gave us an entirely new perspective on electronic warfare. Rather than seeing jamming as a blunt instrument that disrupted all communications in an area, we learned to target specific enemy functions with precision, allowing us to maintain our own command and control while degrading the enemy's capabilities." The impact of Fairchild's innovations extended beyond immediate tactical applications. The selective jamming approach she developed represented a fundamental shift in electronic warfare philosophy, moving from broad-spectrum disruption to targeted function-specific interference. This approach would influence military communications and electronic warfare doctrine for decades following the war. In January 1945, as the Italian campaign entered its final phases, Fairchild was selected to lead a Spezia,